This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 7. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Publius Varus, former governor of Syria, was now governor of Germania, commanding 3 legions. The tribes were not acquiescent to Roman rule, and they balked at paying taxes to their overlords. The German Arminius, an ally of the Romans, who had been given citizenship and even the rank of a knight, began to plot an insurrection. He sent word to Varus informing him of a plot, and he encouraged him to lead his armies to suppress it. Though Varus was told that this could be a likely trap, he believed Arminius, and he marched his armies directly into an ambush, losing all 3 standards. Varus and his officer staff committed suicide when they saw the extent of the defeat and that there was no chance of escape. Tiberius was shocked, as he had recommended Varus as the governor of Germania. But in the end, all blame for the defeat was placed squarely on Varus, whose name went down in infamy. Claudius's famous older brother, the Roman general Germanicus, married Vipsania Agrippina, also known as Agrippina the Elder, and together they had many children, beginning with 2 boys, Nero, and then Drusus, and then later another son, Gaius, and eventually 3 girls, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla. In 14 CE, Germanicus led his legions on a campaign to avenge the Roman loss in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest that Varus had waged. He even led the expedition for the recovery and burial of the bones from the fallen Roman legions. On the German campaign, he was accompanied by his family, including his wife Agrippina, and their young toddler Gaius, who marched around the Roman troops in childlike soldier gear, issuing orders. The troops took to young Gaius so well that they nicknamed him Bootikins, or Little Boots, which in Latin is Caligula. The name remained throughout his adult life, though few would call him that to his face. Livia and Augustus exchanged letters about a number of matters throughout their marriage, and a few were about Germanicus's brother, Claudius, who, we recall, had a speech impediment due to a slight hearing loss at a young age because of a sickness. Recall that he also tended to drool, and he walked with a limp, among other things. His physical disabilities kept him from boys' games as he grew up. Romans tended to be terribly cruel to the weak and the maladept. Livia wondered about her grandson Claudius and what options and opportunities might be available to him. Augustus was concerned that if he be given responsibility in public, he might be the object of ridicule, or, in Augustus's own words, mirth and derision. Augustus also thought that they should really settle the matter about whether Claudius was even capable of public office, given his impediments and lack of intellectual prerequisites in Augustus's mind. He certainly did not measure up to his brother Germanicus, and promoting Claudius along with Germanicus would simply look foolish. Even Claudius's own sister mocked him. Augustus ultimately reached the age of 75, a remarkable feat for the ancient world, before he died on the 19th of August in the year 14, while at his villa in Nola, north of Mount Vesuvius, now known as Somma Vesuviana. Whereas the issue of succession was so profound for most of the years of his principate, with potential heirs being Agrippa, then successfully his 2 grandsons, Lucius and Gaius, then co-heirs Tiberius and Postumus, and ultimately, perhaps due to Livia's influence, Augustus left the empire to her son, Tiberius. Augustus had deposited his will with the Vestal virgins 1 year before his death, and we'll say more about the Vestals in a later episode, but according to the will, Augustus left 1/3 of his estate to Livia, and the other 2/3 to Tiberius. There is no mention of Postumus, Augustus's only grandson. The will began thus: Since a cruel fate has deprived me of my sons Gaius and Lucius, Tiberius Caesar is to be heir to 2/3 of my estate. Prior to the news of Augustus's death being widely reported, the centurion Gaius Crispus executed young Postumus, and then reported to Tiberius that, quote, "Your orders have been carried out," end quote. Tiberius quickly disavowed any such order and said he would bring the matter to the Senate to be sure. Later, he said that the order must have been made by Augustus himself. At Augustus's funeral, Tiberius's son Drusus delivered the first eulogy, and Tiberius himself delivered another, saying, "It's fitting that we should not mourn for him, but, while now giving his body back to nature, should forever glorify his soul as that of a god." Octavian's rule has been referred to as the Pax Augusta, or the Augustan peace. In 9 BCE, he built and dedicated to his wife Livia the altar of peace, which can still be seen today on the banks of the Tiber. Further, according to the will, Livia was granted the title Augusta, which meant that she would maintain her status and power. As a way to honor her departed husband, Livia decided to establish the Ludi Palatini, or the Palatine Games, to begin each year on January 17th, the anniversary of their marriage. As for Julia, Augustus's wayward daughter and Tiberius's second wife, Tiberius continued her exile, not allowing her to return to the city, and even eliminating her allowance that had been granted to her by Augustus. It's believed that she died shortly thereafter in Rhegium, the place of her exile. For the military, Tiberius effectively postponed the pension age, which up to that time had required 16 years of service. Tiberius ordered that any soldier who had served not more than 20 years was no longer eligible for decommissioning. Upon hearing of Augustus's death and their own lengthier terms of service, the Roman legions stationed in Germania mutinied. They even encouraged Germanicus to claim the empire for himself, but Germanicus remained loyal and subservient to Tiberius. A young, high-spirited Roman soldier by the name of Cassius Chaerea also distinguished himself by cutting down many of the mutineers. The mutinous soldiers were eventually quelled by the personal popularity of Germanicus and a daring move by his wife, Agrippina the Elder, who had 3 children with her at the time and was pregnant with their 4th. Agrippina the Elder told the troops that their mutinous attitude made it unsafe for her and her children, so they were going to seek safety with the Germans. Only then did the mutinous legions come to their senses out of respect for the general and his family, which included 3-year-old Gaius, also known as Boudiccanes, Caligula. They clamored to bring the young toddler back, and they relented from their rebellious behavior. There were strange rumors at that time about Postumus, as he was dead before Augustus's own funeral. Some said that Augustus himself went to visit him in May, only months before he died. It's not known what was said or done in that meeting, but some thought that it was a visit of reconciliation, and that Augustus wanted Postumus to be his heir. Conspiracists believed that Livia would have heard of this and poisoned Augustus to keep her own son Tiberius as the sole heir apparent. Others say that the story's only that, a story meant to discredit Tiberius and his reign, as Augustus would not have named Postumus as heir due to his reckless behavior and penchant for trouble. Further, Livia and Augustus were so close that she would not have poisoned him in his old age. About a month after Augustus's death, on September 17th, the Senate voted him divine, or in other words, they declared him a god. But such a declaration could not be made without proof. Fortunately, Numerius Atticus testified that he had seen the soul of Augustus ascend into heaven. He was so confident that he swore an oath to this effect, and for that he was paid 1,000,000 sesterces by Augustus's widow Livia. Thus the Senate had the proof they needed to declare Augustus divine. The Senate also instructed Livia and Tiberius to erect a temple dedicated to Augustus, with a priest and priestess appointed in his honor, who would be none other than Germanicus, Livia's grandson, and Livia herself. The 25-year-old Herod Agrippa, in Rome since he was 6 years old, was still reliant on the imperial family for support. He simply did not have his own resources to keep up the lifestyle to which he'd become accustomed. He had developed fine tastes, excessive spending habits, and was known for licentiousness and immorality. With the change in princeps, Claudius, now 23 years old, continued to be racked by his physical ailments, which had kept him from playing the regular games that young boys would play growing up, and these same ailments kept him from military training. He had spent much of his childhood under the care of women and in the presence of books. But now, having been shut out of these activities, as well as public rituals most of his life, he thought it an opportune time to ask his uncle Tiberius to allow him to begin the cursus honorum, the standard course of honors that men take in their political and military careers. Tiberius declined, but gave him some ornaments associated with consular status instead. It was the equivalent of giving a rich son a toy car on their birthday when they asked for a real sports car. Claudius let go of any hopes of serving in office and instead retreated to a scholarly life outside the glare of the public spotlight. As he continued to read the multiple histories, biographies, and records available to him, Claudius learned more and more about his own family that was not flattering, especially during the period of the many civil wars. As emperor, Tiberius was assisted by two exceptionally capable allies early in his reign: Sejanus, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard and a 2-decade civil servant to the imperial family, and Germanicus, Tiberius's nephew, son of Antonia the Younger and his brother Drusus. Their other 2 children in order of birth were Claudia Livia, known as Livilla, and Claudius, who would become emperor. Drusus distinguished himself in battle, defeating a number of Germanic tribes. Yet he died in 9 BCE after having been thrown off his horse on expedition in Germania. Though he was victorious and made gains in Germania, these gains were effectively lost after the Battle of the Teutoburg forest in CE 9. So now in Germania, a year after successfully putting down the mutiny, Germanicus and Agrippina had a baby girl, whom they named Agrippina. She was born in a garrison which served as a headquarters of sorts for her father and his military expeditions. Decades later, Agrippina would create a town there and name it a colony, and today it's modern-day Cologne, Germany. In 16 CE, something unusual happened in that a man appeared claiming to be Postumus. Most people could not remember precisely what Postumus even looked like, as he had been banished 10 years earlier. Rumors spread that Postumus was alive, as he showed himself in Ostia, the port city of Rome. Many of the common people were swept away by his claims, but not only the commoners, even some from the imperial household. Some knights and even some senators bought into the story. Tiberius looked into the matter and determined that the man was an impostor. He was really Postumus's former slave, Clemens, who 2 years earlier had set out to send Postumus away. Tiberius had the impostor arrested and brought to the palace, where he asked him, "How did you become Agrippa?" To which the impostor replied, "The same way you became Caesar." Tiberius had had enough and executed Clemens without fanfare or publicity. And in an act of clemency or laziness, Tiberius was content not to chase down those senators, knights, and others who were rumored to have supported these claims. Next time, we'll learn about the triumph of Germanicus and his unfortunate, untimely death.